What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Learning Quick. Super excited to have Brittney Postma on today to talk all things Svelte and SvelteKit. Why you love it, why you get into it, why it's the best framework out there in your opinion, and some things that you're going to be doing with it as you start a new job, I think, in a few weeks. Brittney, welcome to the
Yeah.
stream. Do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Brittney Postma, as James said. I have three wonderful children. I'm a front end designer and developer. I have a background in graphic design, but after I had kids, I quit working. And so I was a stay at home mom, and I was looking for something that would bring back that love of design, but give me some more passion and that I could also do while I was watching them. So I stumbled along like free code camp and found programming and HTML and CSS where I could do like design, but I also like interact with it. And I fell in love. And so for the last 3 years, I've just been diving into everything with programming in general and just dove straight into that. And I'm in love with it. I
So
don't know
you,
how much you want to go into like the future parts of that, but that's a
I'll
little bit
set
of the background.
yeah, I'll set you up for that in a second. I do have like this is a pretty cool thing. So you said like you started programming 3 years ago.
Yeah, just 3 years ago in August. So yeah, 3 years ago right now,
Nice.
this month.
And I don't know if you feel like you're really early on. I don't know if that feels early for you, but I'm surprised. I never would have thought that you were one. I guess so many people are self-taught, so I guess that's not the thing. I would have thought you had been programming for longer than that. So that's a really cool thing to be able to say. Like, one, you wanted to do something a little different and embrace your design background. So you found
Yeah.
programming, found the resources, learned, and now, I mean, like you're definitely one of the people that is most vocal about Svelte, and probably one of the people that other people would look to for resources and guidance in Svelte and SvelteKit.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. I feel like I was so passionate about it. I think that I just dove into everything that I could find. So I did those free code camp things pretty fast. And then I went to Udemy and I looked for courses there and went through, and everything I was looking at pointed me towards React. So I dove almost straight into React within probably 6 months of starting. I was already in the React world. So I did a Udemy course for from zero to mastery, and that kind of got me a little bit of notoriety. Was the first one to finish the React course, and I became a star mentor in that community. And
Cool.
they have over 400,000 developers there, over 200,000 just in the Discord. So I think that helped me like in learning too, because if you teach and help and mentor other people, it is a different skill set and you learn so much more. I feel like by trying to talk other people through problems. So I think that really helped propel me towards more learning. So then I had done Gatsby in the React course and built my site in Gatsby and found Sapper almost right after that, listening to Syntax FM. And
Nice.
so, because Scott was so into it, I'm like, okay, I have to check this out because I love those guys. I love listening to them. And I'm like, if he thinks this is great, then I'm going to try it out. So I switched my Gatsby site to Sapper, and it was like love at first sight. I'm like, this feels like vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is like one of the reasons it's like just enough magic that it's easier than just
Hmm.
vanilla JavaScript, but it feels the same as writing like a vanilla site, which I love. So I was like, I'm going to switch. I switched every site that I had. I started putting all of my focus into Sapper. I do still do some React stuff. I use Next.js and Gatsby and other things, but I've really just switched my focus into Svelte.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to call out, you kind of rolled your eyes when you talked about Scott mentioning Svelte because he's been so outspoken, like in such a good way, right? And so many people I think um, have tried it, but I feel like for a while it was like, all right, Scott talks about Svelte again in such a great way. But that's the kind of thing that like gets people excited. And I've said this so many
It
times
does.
in my career of like, I'm behind, right? Like I had heard about React all the time for 2 years before I tried it. I heard about Gatsby for 6 months all the time before I tried it. I heard about Next.js for a year all the time before I tried it. I heard about Svelte and SvelteKit for like months before I actually tried it. And you were one of the people that was kind of hyping it up as well. And so I gave it a shot for the first time a couple of months ago. Did my SvelteKit crash course, and I will say, like people are commenting in the chat about either they'd never tried it before or they did and they like it. I think Will is saying it's so simple. I've never heard someone give Svelte and or slash SvelteKit a try and not enjoy it. Like I've only heard
Yeah,
good things from everyone that's given it a shot.
exactly. And I saw Kunal said that he heard Svelte is more of a compiler than a framework, and that is exactly it. Svelte is a compiler first. So Svelte, the language, is a compiler, and it compiles all of your code down into vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the other end. So where frameworks like React and Vue have a virtual DOM that they have essentially a string of the DOM to diff your changes to. Svelte has just the vanilla stuff. So you're doing like vanilla JavaScript, create node and delete node and those things in a Svelte app rather than having a virtual DOM.
So do you want to continue on that a little bit and tell people a little more in detail, like what Svelte is, and then maybe SvelteKit and what the difference is there, and what are your favorite features of both or either?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, Svelte is a compiler. So, it is kind of the base language, and that is what it started out as. And if you built a Svelte app a couple of years ago, it was almost like a Create React app, if you're familiar with the React side of things. So, you're building a client side application that's going to run. And that is what Svelte did, is it compiled that and everything was done on the client side. Or, yeah, I
Hmm.
think so. So, and then Sapper was there to do server side rendering and static generation. So, Sapper was a separate framework that you could do those things with. And now Sapper has not necessarily been killed off. They're still maintaining it, but it is not going to have any new updates. And SvelteKit is the new migration path for every Svelte app going forward. So, SvelteKit is like Next.js and other frameworks that are coming out next that are going to be allow for server side rendering, static site generation, and for client side rendering. Whatever you need is going to be there for that. So it does page-based routing, and you can do API serverless functions. Like you can do anything within a Svelte kit application that you could do in like Next or Next.
Yeah, and
And
it's not confusing at all that there's Next.js, there's Next.js, which are
and
basically the same, but
Nest.js.
and that's what I was gonna add in Nest.js, which is totally different. So
Yeah.
Next.js is the React version of what we're talking about, uh, server side rendering, client side rendering, and static pages. Nuxt is the Vue equivalent, Nuxt.js. Then there's
Yes.
Nest.js, which is
And I'm
a
so
backend
glad.
framework built on top of Node that really is basically it looks just like Angular does on the front end, but it's for the back end because it's got like the MVC pattern and services and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
go ahead.
think you also asked me about some of my
Hmm.
features, my favorite features. I talked a little bit about how it just feels like vanilla, which
Hmm.
I love. I love the simplicity of having everything in one component. So you can have your script tag that has your JavaScript. You have your markup for HTML, which has a little bit of sugar syntax in there that just makes it easier. So the if and the each async blocks, things like that, just makes it easier to do things in JavaScript within your markup. And then you have your style tag where you could use vanilla CSS. You can use the new CSS variables and do style props in line, which is really cool. I mean, there's
Wait,
a
what
lot of
is
new
this?
features. So
Hold
you
on.
can have CSS variables in like a global file or within the same Svelte file, and
Hmm.
then you can update them as a prop in line in SvelteKit. And this is a fairly new change, maybe like a month ago, but you can do like dash dash, whatever your variable name is, and update it in line.
Is that different than regular CSS variables? Is
Well,
it
you
a
would have to put it in the CSS. This is like inline style, like it's a prop on the markup.
okay? I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
That's cool. And
that's pretty cool.
so SvelteKit comes with CSS modules by default. Is that right? Or it
You can use CSS
scoped.
modules, but it does so they are scoped by default.
Okay, to the
So
component
if
that
you
they're
put
in.
a style tag and you use just the element selector, so if you use a div, a section, an article as the selector, it's only going to be to the things that are within that same component because it gives each component a unique class name that it then processes when it compiles out on the front end. So then you have
Okay,
a unique class name for each component, and those styles don't get shared between components. You can
gotcha.
share styles by doing a global one and putting it in like a
Yep.
layout component or higher up in the tree.
And we talked about, I had some questions about that when I was doing my SvelteKit crash course because I was trying to figure out where to do the global CSS. And Avnish is asking why use CSS modules. I think the big thing is for it's still scoping, right? Like you can scope them.
I, I don't use CSS modules, so I'm not even familiar. Is that like styled components or what is?
They now I'm starting to second guess my understanding of CSS modules, but
Yeah.
you they come with scoping to some, yes. So Nikki T is saying CSS modules will give you scoping, which is my answer now. And
Okay.
I kind of feel awkward trying to answer this because I'm stumbling around, but that's the main takeaway, I
So
think.
they will give you scoping, but Svelte does that by default.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Yep.
doesn't do that through CSS modules. It does that through that unique class
Mm-hmm.
identifier for each
Yep.
component.
Yep. So what you're saying there is like the styles that you add inside of a given component when they actually get rendered to HTML, that's that class name that you may create of like border or whatever, I don't know. Like what it then becomes is like XYZ123 dash border.
Yeah,
So it
it's
has like
S
a
dash and
prefix.
then like
Yeah.
some prefix they
Mm-hmm.
or suffix they put on it to make it unique. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I was thinking CSS modules for some reason was like SAS and other preprocessors that you can use. And you can use those out of the box with SvelteKit. I don't use those either. CSS is so powerful now, vanilla, that I usually don't use that. If I use
Mm-hmm.
anything, I use Tailwind because it's just easier sometimes to use Tailwind.
Yep.
And I am pretty good at like doing the config file to my preferences. So
Mm-hmm.
it's still different, but it's yeah. So those are the two things that I use mainly are Tailwind or vanilla CSS. And
Yeah, and that's it's kind of like the jQuery versus vanilla JavaScript conversation too, where like for a while jQuery had so many utilities that were just like extremely helpful for working with the DOM and that sort of stuff that vanilla JavaScript didn't. Now, like so many of those things are built into vanilla JavaScript that it just makes it's like I don't really need jQuery. So similar to like CSS
exactly.
variables, like that was a big thing that you could do in SAS that you couldn't do in regular CSS for a while. I think the other thing that is cool that you still can't do in regular CSS is like nesting
They're
your.
adding that. I
Oh,
don't
they
know if you
are
saw
okay.
that that's a
No, I didn't.
proposal and it's actually out
Okay,
in Canary, I think,
sweet.
already. So you
Okay,
can do it in like some of the more beta
modern.
versions of the yeah, a Canary or I
Okay,
think it's out in Canary, but you might have to double check me on that. But Adam Argyle
okay,
and Una Kravitz have shared because they
cool.
both work for
Yeah,
Chrome, right? Chrome developer tools. And they have been sharing that that stuff is coming out soon. So that will
cool.
be very interesting. And yeah, I do remember seeing styles.class name. I see that more in
Hmm.
React. Yeah.
In Next.js by default, they come configured that way.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah. Um, did I say React or Next? I meant Next. If I didn't say
You
that.
said next, I
Okay.
think.
I just okay.
And that's what I was going to say too is that I feel like these frameworks and these things that we get that are coming out, technology's moving so fast, but it's making the fundamental languages better because
Hmm.
of that. So they're including like they see these things that people liked about jQuery, they're
Yep.
including them in JavaScript. They see these things that people like about Next and they're moving them to Nuxt and Svelte.
Hmm.
And so we're all building off of each other to make essentially the Jamstack better. And I feel like the Jamstack is sort of starting to come together, which is what it's been missing for a little while. Is it's these separate pieces that you have to pull in and
Yep.
figure out how to get together. But we're finally starting to come back and figure out how we're going to glue all that together and make it just a better developer experience than it already is.
Yeah. And so this maybe goes back to comment from Cute Guy Canal of like revisiting what the roadmap is to web development or what it would be now versus a couple of years ago because the technologies just change so often that that's part of that's like the exciting thing is right like it's we always
Yeah.
have something to learn. We're never done, especially as a content creator. People are like, where do you come up with your ideas? I'm like, just pay attention to the million things that people are talking about. There's things out there to talk about every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Listen to podcasts, listen to compressed FM, listen to syntax FM. Like,
You
I
should
mean, listen to
go ahead
what
and
is
plug
popular.
yours.
Yeah. Oh yeah, listen to perfect.dev.
Yes. um Avnish has a question asking if I like CSS modules. I don't particularly have an opinion. Like if I worked in a project that had CSS modules, that would be fine. Cute Guy Canal is asking if you can ask a question, ask away. The other thing I wanted, so I've got two things. One is a little bit of a rant that I won't go on my rant, but you talked about like Next.js does this, Next.js does the same thing. This has been the epitome of like things for me for years. Where if you look at like car brands, like they have for this minivan to this minivan, this truck to this truck, like they each have the different tiers of cars and trucks and minivans,
Yeah.
and they all get more or less the same features. And cell phones, Android versus iPhone, always get more or less the same features every year. So like nothing is honestly that different from anything. And I feel like it's cool in the Jamstack space of like we're kind of growing together, but it's also like some people are just not. I feel like I miss the uniqueness of
Like,
things.
is it stagnating a
Yeah.
little bit?
Um,
Yeah.
so
I
here's
could
I'm
definitely see
curious
that.
your response to this. So in styled components, one of the things that I like is if you wanted to do something with your props, for example, it's basically a function, and the props are like an input that you take in, and then you can decide based on this input, I'm going to render this color or this color or this border
Mhm.
or this font size or whatever. And it's basically like it's syntactically a little odd, but it's basically JavaScript that's inside of that.
Yeah.
I much prefer that over something like Sass because I'm not having to learn another syntax. I'm learning like I'm just using my JavaScript skills, which is the carryover to that. I love Svelte syntax. I think it's very simple, and there's things like with data binding that are just so much easier than React. But there is a little bit of like thinking about the if conditional or the for each or each in Svelte
Mhm.
versus if you were to do that in React, you do your brackets and you just use more or less regular JavaScript. Like the map thing is kind of tricky, but it's also something that you use in regular JavaScript, or you do like the and trick to conditionally
I
display something. So do
I think
you?
that is unreadable.
Yeah. So that and so I would feel like the opposite in that sense because it's I agree like readability um could be a concern there for me, but writing it's like I don't have to think about a totally different syntax. I can just write JavaScript if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see how that would come across for someone who is mainly a JavaScript developer if you're writing JavaScript. And style components, I could see using that too. I don't know if I would personally. I'm not a big fan of CSS and JS, and I would rather just keep my styles to my styles and use some state or something in the JavaScript to update that color, which is still kind of weird because you're still using JavaScript to do it. But um, sorry, so we were saying that style components and then using that syntax inside of the JSX,
Hmm.
you would prefer that over the way that the each block is in Svelte.
For
Is that
and
what you're
it is. Let me be one bit clear in support of Svelte. I still think I prefer Svelte and its things that it has in its JSX equivalent to
yeah.
JSX as a whole. But the ability to like write JavaScript to do some of the conditional rendering and things, it's not a new syntax. Like for me, unless I was using Svelte every day, I would have to go and look up how do I format this each. Like it's simple, but I still have to like go and get
It
all right,
is
bracket goes
simple, and
here.
I think after you do it a couple of times, you would
Hmm.
get it, and that's one of the things I like is that for the most part, it is just vanilla JavaScript. Like, you're writing vanilla JavaScript up in the script tag, and then you're just using a little bit of that sugar syntax I was talking about. So, I still think that, like, an if block in Svelte, if you say hashtag if or pound if, and then whatever your statement is that you're checking for, and then you get an else section,
Hmm.
and then you close off your if block, is more readable than the way you do it in React. You're in your markup and you're reading JavaScript, and
Yep.
that's difficult for me. That's what I don't like, is that I'm reading HTML and then I see this JavaScript syntax and I'm like, my brain has to shift,
Yep.
and I'm like going back to it. But I am more on the HTML and CSS side than a full JavaScript developer. I'm much better at HTML and CSS. So I think that may just be a mindset
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And I think it gets so much more exaggerated by a map. Like I write
Yes.
JavaScript all the time, so writing a map is second nature to me. But reading that, especially inside
Yeah.
of HTML or what is mostly HTML, and even writing that for a lot of people, like I remember a coworker of mine at FedEx was trying React for the first time, and he was trying to do like map through something and create like list items, and he like was there for an hour and couldn't do it, and he was like, I hate React, and it, but
It's
it was
confusing.
just because like for him inside of there it was tough, right? It wasn't natural, and he didn't have like modern JavaScript experience. So like the whole
Yeah.
thing was kind of new. So yeah, I could definitely see that tripping up people in terms of writing and then reading it as well.
So that's why I always say too is like having those foundational skills is the most important thing. So
Hmm.
having a foundational JavaScript knowledge is going to be your best bet rather than jumping into Svelte or React or any of the frameworks. But I do feel like Svelte is one of the easiest ones to transition into because the syntax makes it so easy to read. If you know what an array is, you know you have an array, you can say pound each whatever your array is named is as whatever you want to
Hmm.
call it. And then you can loop over that and you kind of understand it's readable. It's saying each items as item. And then I want to do this for each item. And
Yep.
that is much more readable to me than reading the JavaScript from
Hmm.
JSX.
Yep. And with the exception of the fact that React is much more popular, if someone were looking for like
Yeah,
the easiest front end framework to learn or to get into, I would send them the Svelte direction. The
it
caveat to
is.
that again is just like resources and popularity in terms of job opportunities in React. Other than that, I wholeheartedly agree. Like Svelte is the easiest to get started with.
Yeah. And it would be based on your situation. I mean, if you're trying to get a job, you probably want to learn React first because there's a lot more React
Hmm.
jobs out there. There's not a ton of Svelte jobs out there right now.
And the important thing, like I've talked about this a lot, none of, again, going back to the conversation about cars and stuff, none of these frameworks are super, super unique. Angular is probably the one that's the most out there because it comes with like over organization when you're just getting started in terms of file structure and it's got TypeScript. So it's probably the most different. But all these things do is accomplish more or less the same thing. So especially if you
Yeah.
get that practice with vanilla JavaScript, you understand the pain of like, okay, every time this piece of data changes, now I need to go and like recreate the DOM. You start to understand where the benefit of data binding comes from, and you start to
Yep.
understand what a framework can do for you. And if you then go to a framework, understand what it's doing for you and why, now you go to another framework. It's the same concepts. You're just learning like how does this framework do it itself.
And that's too, like once you learn those foundational skills and you take those to a framework, each framework becomes easier to learn.
Yep.
So your job forever becomes easier. Learning things becomes easier because you know what it's doing under the hood, so to speak.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I want to go back to, well, one, Chris Ellis had a comment about how many brands of water are there, talking about like uniqueness. But cute guy Canal asks, what is the technology you most struggled with up until now in your coding journey? I've never quite thought about this, so I'm going to put you on the spot and
Oh,
give you a second to.
it's definitely React because,
Okay.
like I said, I jumped in maybe 6 months. It might have even been earlier than that, right after. I mean, I didn't have any of that foundational
Hmm.
JavaScript knowledge. I had done, I think, the free code camp thing, and that was pretty much it for JavaScript. So I had not really used it to do anything, and I jumped into React. I could not tell the difference between what was React and what was JavaScript. And I was doing it with class-based components at that point. So it was like component did mount and component unmounted. And I'm like, I don't even know what these mean. Is this JavaScript? Is this a React function? Like I had no idea. And so definitely React was my hardest.
That's cool. Yeah. I I feel like I had a relatively good transition to React. Um, I'd been in Angular for a while at work, and then did the transition to React. I'll go back a little further in my career to .NET C Sharp and the concepts of this is specifically in Xamarin, I think, which is a framework for building cross-platform mobile applications. There's two concepts that like I heard these words over and over and over again, and I never understood what they were until like years later. Inversion of control and dependency injection. And these words, like I don't even know if they mean anything to you. They may not mean
I
anything
don't
to
know
a
what
lot of
inversion
people.
control is. I've heard of
Okay.
dependency,
Yep.
whatever you said.
Dependency injection. Yeah. So they're kind of out there.
Injection, yes.
Yeah. So there's they
Injecting
actually
dependencies, yes.
yeah, and they actually go hand in hand. So the way Angular works is like instead of me passing instead of importing something directly into a component where in React or Svelte you would import it at the top, for some things you can just define in your constructor, I want to receive this thing. So instead
Yep.
of me like going and getting it, I say I want to receive it, and Angular, the framework, goes and grabs that thing and throws it in there just because you said I want it, basically. So instead of getting it, you declare I want it, and
Is
Angular
that a
goes and gives it to you.
context in some
It's
aspect?
I'm like behind, like further behind the scenes. I'm not exactly sure. It's part of like the module system and the built-in things that they have, but
I've never used Angular, so I'm like unfamiliar. I know that they provide a lot of to you out of the
hmm
box, and
yep.
then does that compile away at all, or does Angular just ship all that? I know Scully is like their static site generator, but
They I don't have specific details to this. They're surely surely some
there's
of
got to be
it
some tree
goes
shaking or
away. Yeah.
something.
There's
Yeah,
got to be a lot cuz if you're yeah, there's got to be.
that
I
would be a
just don't know
huge
specific details.
application.
Yeah. Um but so the dependency injection is Angular like giving you the thing that you ask for. In version of control is basically the same idea, but it's like instead of me controlling getting something, the framework is controlling getting it and then giving it to me.
Oh,
So they
okay.
kind of have the control. I just tell them what I want. So they're
Yeah,
basically
I
kind of
gotcha.
the same thing.
Okay.
Um, Johan in the chat, and I'll be curious. I think you already touched on this, is saying that Tailwind is too verbose, which I think is a lot of people's concern with Tailwind. I personally have used it and loved it, and it sounds like you've had a pretty positive experience as well.
I have had a really great experience with Tailwind, and I feel like it takes a little bit of getting used to because if you're writing that inline, it can bloat your markup largely. So what I've started doing is trying to, if there's a repeated thing like a list item, I'm trying to use either add apply or I'm trying to pull that out into a variable and just sticking that variable like a class name onto each of
Hmm.
those rather than just bloating my markup. So I do that, but I feel like Tailwind gives you a good basis to start with. And so you
Yeah.
have those rims that you can use and it scales everything nicely. It's really easy. I know that 4 is one rim, so I can do like padding P-4 and I've got that done. So it's just it makes it easier for me to write my regular styles and then off of that do like hover, focus and
hmm
media queries inline is so much easier. And that is probably my number one reason for using it is media queries. So I don't have to write that big long media query anymore.
Yep.
I just write large, I want it to do this instead and it's done.
Which is so similar to the concept of Bootstrap, where they had it was
Yeah.
classes that you could use, and they had like the ability to use those to build out your grid system, which was like revolutionary at the time with the 12-point grid, and that was what like everyone was using for a while.
Mhm.
And Tailwind has just gone the complete utility route where Bootstrap had some utilities, but would also like package a bunch of utilities together to give you a card or something like
Yeah.
that. Versus Tailwind gives you everything individually, and you have to figure out how to use
And
it.
you still have to be good at CSS to use
hmm
it. It's not that it's giving you these components built up out of the box. Now that's Tailwind UI. That's a separate thing that you pay for. But Tailwind just gives you all these utility classes that you can use with a good basic starting out point that's good for scaling with design. And if you want to get something up and running fast, like I use Tailwind 100%.
Yep. And the rules that they have in place for consistency, I think is the biggest takeaway for me.
Yeah.
They get like you said, they give you those ranges of sizes, they give you those ranges of colors, and you can work within them to build something cool.
And they fit well together. I almost never use their base colors. I usually
Mm.
always reconfigure their colors in a config file, but their base sizes
Yep.
scale well together design wise. Their designer is fantastic. And I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but they've been working together for years and he's spent a long time like refining like how much distance should be between things and what that scale should look like. And I think that they've done a really good job with that. Steve Schroger, yeah.
Yep. And they also have, I think it's Tailwind Labs is their YouTube channel, which is
Yeah.
really good. Like they've got great tutorials on there if anybody's interested in following that. I want to switch back to Svelte and SvelteKit and talk
Yeah.
about your new role. Because I know you have the new role. We haven't talked in depth about what you'll be doing exactly. So I want to talk about that. And I think you can talk about this too, but I think you'll haven't started yet. You'll start in a week and a half or so.
Yeah, the 7th of September is my official start date. I was not looking for a job, surprisingly. So I do follow like the Svelte jobs. It's put out, they do it for React jobs, Vue jobs. They have sites for each one, but Svelte jobs, and they sent me a newsletter every month with like new jobs that are out. And I follow the Svelte Discord has a jobs channel as well. So I was just kind of peeking through there every once in a while. I like to see, because I said on Svelte Radio when I was on there, I was like, if I ever did take a job, it would have to be something that would bring in my CSS design and work with Svelte.
Yeah.
And that is what this job is going to be doing. So it was like a perfect balance. I feel very privileged that I was able to do this because, one, I think that if I had not done the learning in public and Auth0 putting out like the SvelteKit starter for me, talking about Svelte on Svelte Radio, doing blog posts and things like that, that I would have gotten this job. I didn't have to do a whiteboarding interview. I just met with the tech lead. I met with one of the developers and a designer on the team, and we just talked about Svelte. And I think they saw that I was passionate and they saw that I had work that was put out there, and they were excited and I was very excited. I'm like, this sounds absolutely perfect. So I did one job application. And I mean, that's like insane, but I feel very privileged that I was able to do that. But without that learning in public, I don't think that I would have gotten this job.
I Yeah, so the idea of the one application seems ridiculous, but also like it's I'm kind of a firm believer that it's almost impossible to get a job unless you have a connection. Like it's just so hard to
Yeah.
get looked at. Like companies have so many resumes, and I've been on both sides of this. And they go through an automatic filter, and if you don't have the keywords, which like
Oh,
is shitty, but at a certain point
that's
like
a
they
good
can't
point.
look at all of them, right? So like some of it's just gaming the system to have the keywords to even get looked at, which is
I
unfortunate.
should say this and like disclaimer a little bit. So I saw that job application. I spent an entire day on a Sunday redoing my
Mhm.
resume. So I went and I redid my entire resume. I made it fit kind of specific to what the needs for this company were. I made a really good cover letter. And I did all of that before putting in my
Mhm.
application on Monday and kind of studying up a little bit about what the company was about. So I
Yep.
knew, like, so I did my research, I did my due diligence, like redoing my resume, making it fit to the company, making a cover letter. So I stood out a little bit. But I mean, it is still like amazing, but I did do that due diligence and
Mhm. Yep.
some background.
And then I think to your point, the most important thing after that is like resume. It's like a game, and you're really not you in particular, but in general, you have to game the system to
Yeah.
get looked at, and some of
You have
that's
to get
doing
noticed somehow.
you have to
Yeah.
get noticed. But after you have someone look at your resume, they're just words on a page. But when you have a video, you have a tutorial, you've been in the community, you've been in different Discord servers, like after you have that sort of credibility, that's the stuff that like makes a huge difference. Like when I applied for the role that I'm in now, like I had a resume that I didn't do too much with, but I was like you want to know if I can do DevRel stuff? Here's my YouTube channel
Here's
of
this.
all these
Yeah.
things. That kind of speaks for itself, right? So I love that you have not only the community experience and like engagement, but also the tangible things to show for it as well.
Discord has been so instrumental for me. I can't describe. Like I talked a little bit earlier about Zero to Mastery and how I kind of came up through that community, but from that I've branched off where I've met you. I'm an admin in your community. I'm in the Level Up Tutorials
Hmm.
community, Party Corgi. I am in another server that I run, but I'm also very active in the Svelte Discord. And so that was another place where actually the developer that interviewed me, I had answered one of his questions a few days
Nice.
before my interview.
Perfect.
And so, I mean, that makes you stand out a little
Yep.
bit and you get to know people that you may not ever have known without doing that. So,
Yep.
especially during the pandemic, it's been a great way to meet and find people.
Yeah, I meant to actually shout some of that out earlier because you were talking about like the best way to learn is to teach, and I was like, learn, build,
Oh,
teach, and the
yeah.
fact that you're a mod
We should have
in
plugged
that
that.
Discord server, yeah. So it's kind of perfect. There's a Discord command I can write it in here that
Nice.
should show the link to that.
I don't have my own Discord server. No, Avnish, I don't. I'm an admin in another one that, I mean, we're very small, so there's
Mhm.
like 10 of us that are active in there, so that's kind of like mine, but I don't need my own Discord
Yeah,
server to manage.
it's tough, and that's why it was so important for me to get other people involved. That can help support and grow the server as well because it's a lot of work.
I would much
behind the
rather
scenes.
have communities like you have and have like groups of people that are like minded, willing to help each other out. And having more people in a community is what I'm interested in.
Hmm.
I'm not interested in running a server. I don't need my
Yeah.
name on it. I don't need the notoriety. I just want to be around people in the community.
Yeah. And that's like, I kind of debated about the name for this. And Learn Build Teach is actually my LLC, but it's not my name in it. So I'm kind of distanced a little bit
Yeah.
in that way to make sure that it is a community driven thing first. Self Teach Me is here hanging out in the chat. What's going on, Amy?
Hey,
And says she
hey,
agrees.
Amy.
There's a question from Avnish. So a little bit different, but relevant to some of the stuff we've talked about. Like, what do you consider as the path of content creator to job? I don't know if that's like, how do you get to be a content creator yourself, or maybe you could just talk more about like, maybe why did you do content creation and then reinforce the fact that like, hey, it
Yeah.
helped you get this job because it helped get
That's a
some
good
visibility.
point. So the site that I first switched from Gatsby to Sapper was my portfolio, bdesign.dev. But when I did that, I was like, I don't know if I want to do a blog. I would love this idea of the digital garden that Maggie Appleton, Chris Biscardi have popularized. And I wanted a place that I could write notes for myself to go back as I was learning, almost like blog posts, but like if I'm learning a Udemy course, I can just write up and post it on there and not worry about like what it looks like, and just as I'm going through the course add to it. And so I started the consolelogs.com as that. So I started it with a Sapper site. It's still in the process of being converted to SvelteKit because I've had some Windows issues with routing and
Hmm.
SvelteKit. So the blogs are a little harder with SvelteKit right
Yeah, I
now.
remember
But
you posting a lot about that progress in
yeah,
Discord.
yeah, I'm using WSL now, and I'll have a MacBook in a couple weeks here, hopefully. So maybe I can get that site switched over. But the consolelogs.com was my place, my digital garden to write notes. So as I was going through a course, I would just write little bits and pieces of what I was learning. And then it was good for me to go back and find information about what I had learned, look at examples, and just a place for all of my notes. So I don't have like, I do have a pen and paper, but I lose that stuff or I don't remember where it's at. So now I had one place to go. And that's how I started. And I started with that. I moved some of my stuff to dev.to and just put canonical links back to my site. And then I've just been blogging for 2 years,
Hmm.
2.5 years, and doing that. And then recently just started doing the videos on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't overstate how much um, how much of an impact content can have on your career. And I'll do a little selfish plug too, since Amy's in the chat and it's relevant. We've been recording a mini series for the Compressed FM podcast on content. So we did one on YouTube, and then a podcast, and then blog post. And our recap is where we're going to have different quotes from different creators of the community and kind of like play them and respond to them and just have like a recap chat about it. But that's
Okay.
what we've talked about consistently, is like you need some extra level of credibility, you need some extra level of visibility. You never know, like you may unintentionally like build an audience, and then maybe that leads to, you can do sponsored content and sell courses, or just find the next job, or someone else reaches out to you for next job. Like it can just have so many impacts on your career.
That's a good point too. Like you don't have to have an audience if you're doing this for the right reasons. Like don't do it for that reason because you're
Hmm.
not. Like I have 700 followers on Twitter. I'm not super popular, but I'm doing it to learn and to benefit myself and the community, not to get followers.
Yep.
So I think if you're doing it for the right reasons and you want to get a job out of it, I mean, putting yourself out there, finding your niche too is like a thing that this was a very unique situation. Working with CSS design systems and Svelte is not like a job you see every day. And that was what I was looking for specifically. So I was privileged there where I could wait for that job to show up, but I'm you just have to put yourself out there in ways that don't make you comfortable and don't do it for just notoriety,
Yeah. And
in
I
my
think
opinion.
yeah, 100%. I think we've got a lot of people in the chat really do that really well. And that's what I get excited to see, some of the names of the people that we have hanging out with us. And Abneesh, since like you asked the question originally, like if part of your question is like, how do I get started in content? You've already done it. How do I grow as content? You're doing it. Like, I don't, Avnish is writing like multiple articles a week or something. Like from my
Yeah.
brain, it's like, oh my gosh, how do you do that many?
I
Cause I don't. writing doesn't resonate as much with me. Like it's much
I was gonna
easier for
say,
me to
I've
do a
heard you say
video.
that,
Yeah.
and I hated writing. I was horrible
Hmm.
at English in school. I was never a good writer, and I don't know, for some reason, like, with coding and, like, that stuff, it made it click. It's
Hmm.
also, like, talking to other people and teaching them. If you're
Yeah.
writing it out, you're explaining it to yourself in a way. So,
Hmm.
I think it was different for me than writing normally, but I still didn't like it, and I still don't like it. I would rather do a video now than write a blog post, but
Hmm.
it was helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I still, and Amy and I talk about this, both of us, especially in relation to the podcast, of we should do a better job of writing articles. And I've said that for like weeks now, and I've only done like one or two. Um, it's
A
just,
newsletter is hard enough, and you guys do a good job with the
yeah.
newsletter, so
Well, have you seen? This is actually part of a talk that I have coming up for my first in-person conference in over a year that I am
Fun.
excited about. But it's 5 things I've automated with the Jamstack. So a lot of the newsletter is automated, which I'm pretty proud of.
Is that one you sent out today?
Hmm.
I
Yep.
saw the email and I didn't click on it because I was getting prepared for this,
Yeah.
but yeah, I saw the email come through. I actually save like most of my newsletters. I have a folder for newsletters. I have a folder for
Mm,
compressed.
nice.
So I
When you have
save
time to
all of
sit
them.
down and read them. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and who knows when I want to go back and look at that stuff.
Hmm. Yeah. Avnish is asking a question about like effort for video editing. I know Amy and I have very different perspectives on this. I am a very minimal video editor. A lot of my videos, um, I record and edit in an hour and publish in an hour, like that morning. So I don't do a lot of fancy cuts. I don't do a lot of animated text, and in some ways, I wish I had more, but I'm not willing to. I'm not willing to spend more time and have that slow me down in terms of actually publishing content. So I'm pretty minimal. Amy, if you watch her videos, it's very obvious that she spends a lot of time and does a really incredible job. And that's what I told her from the beginning. I'm like, your videos are awesome. I don't, laziness. I don't know what it is. Like, I don't put that amount of time into my editing. How much editing do you do on your video content?
So it takes me a very long time to edit. I go through and I do like 100 takes. I think I heard Amy say this on Compressed maybe last week too, where she takes so many hours to record her video and
Hmm.
then goes back and edits. And I do the same thing. Like I overanalyze everything and it's so hard to match your screen up. So it's something I definitely need to get better at where I'm being more natural, I feel like is good on the camera. If people see you make errors, like just go through it. Like
Hmm.
it's helpful to people. And I'm trying to get better at that. I don't do a ton of video content right now. So, I mean, I'm hoping that in the future I'll get to do more and that I'll get better at making short times because a 15-minute video shouldn't take you an entire day or 2 days
Yep.
like it does.
But it can, and like Amy's saying grass is always greener. She wishes she was faster. Some of this is a personality trait. I made a TikTok about this, and it's like behavioral interviews. Tell me your greatest strength, tell me your greatest weakness, and how like no one really wants to answer greatest weakness. But for me, like all of my strengths are also weaknesses. So from this perspective, like one of my strengths is that I'm completely comfortable with working on something until it's 90 to 95% done and not worrying about the last 5%.
Yeah.
Um, Amy, I think, is the complete opposite, where she would have a hard time letting go of that last 5%, which is why she spends so much more time
That's the
doing editing.
designer, right? I
Yep.
mean, yeah, it's the designer in you. Like it's
Hmm.
so hard. Yeah. You
So
want
it's,
everything to look perfect before you release it. I got
hmm
over that a little bit with the digital garden idea, like
yeah.
just releasing things. They may not have been perfect, but it is like style wise, you want things to look perfect and it
Hmm.
feels bad when they don't.
Yep.
So
And
it's just something
that's,
you have to get over.
it's a, it's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Like I could use this for both greatest weakness and greatest strength, because the greatest strength of that for me is like I have the ability to move quicker. I have the ability to ship stuff and move quicker. The downside of that is like the stuff that I ship is probably never going to look as good as y'all's because you spend that extra time, but I get more content out there, and that's what's kind of worked for me with YouTube specifically. So there's always give
And
and
it's
take.
better in the long run. If you get more content out there, that's amazing. That's better for the community too.
Mm.
And you. Like, yeah.
Chris Ellis is referencing Michael Scott quote, "I work too hard, I care too much, and sometimes I can be too invested in my job." Being okay with iterating, yeah. Yeah, it's fun. Content creation is a fun space. Um, Thankfully, it's something I end up just enjoying.
Quantity is greater. Yeah, quantity is definitely greater. I mean, you have to have some quality, but I think your production value is really good. So you have production value there. And even if your 10-minute, 15-minute thing isn't like the best thing in the world, that more content is helping the
Hmm.
community grow. So yeah.
Yeah, it's always a balance of um, and this answer could change for different people depending on it. But like, how if I spent 3 more hours editing and making it much nicer, how much does that really impact views and likes and that sort of stuff? And I had this conversation with Jesse from the Code Stacker YouTube channel early on.
Hmm.
I was like, "Oh, your stuff, like your edits are so amazing. Your stuff looks so great." And he's like, he kind of was like, "Yeah, but it didn't really matter." Like at the end of the day, like he loves
Yeah.
it, so he spends time doing it, and he doesn't have a problem with it, I don't think. But he was also like, it's not like people are like, okay, this is a channel I have to stick with because there's like a few extra hours of editing involved. So
It's
you have to
not
balance like what the trade off
worth the
is.
value,
Mhm.
isn't there, in doing it, maybe.
The practice, you don't always get to pick what you're known for. You just put in the reps, and the rest will follow. Yeah, quantity at first to even learn what quality matters. Exactly. I think that's the most important part about it. The more content that you create, the more you learn along the way. The more you learn what not to do, the more you learn to do, and continue to iterate on it. We're getting about at the hour. To I'll give people a question, or excuse me, a second. If you have any other Svelte and SvelteKit questions, do you know, are there any? Do you have an update on like where SvelteKit is in terms of like it was? I think it's still in beta. When
They
might that change?
They are still in beta. They just released a path to 1.0. Let me see if I can
Hmm.
find the link to it. So they have a few issues that need to get fixed before they can. And they're like, if the people that are currently working on them do it, it's never going to get released. So they need help. So
Okay.
they're looking for a lot of Veet. I'm I'm still like second guessing how to say
Yeah,
that because
I
there's
think
been
you're
so
right.
much
Yeah.
controversy. So they need a lot of Veet support. So if people have experience working with Veet, they need to maybe contribute to SvelteKit.
Can you see can y'all see it out there? The dog on the, like, she just
Yeah.
sprawled out and is just living her best life back there. Avnish asked the question, like, how do I know if the quality of my content is good? I look at the reaction that people have. Like, you may not have a ton of visibility, although Avnish, I think you've already gotten a lot of visibility for the content that you're creating. But for whatever visibility that you do have, pay really close attention to how people will respond. What are the comments that they're leaving? Do they call out something that you can improve on? And then like go back and look at it yourself from the perspective of, if you were reading this, if you were watching this, what are the things that are done well? What do you feel like is missing? What could you differently? And then just continue to iterate on that.
Maybe I can find it on the GitHub.
So are there? I'm assuming there's not like, it's like stability is probably mainly what they would be working on. Like, it's not like a set of new features or anything.
There's
They're just
some
like,
Veet specific issues
okay,
and that just need to get resolved before. Here it is, help getting to 1.0. And here's the link directly to that thread in GitHub. So
I
and
brought.
then the
Sorry.
issues are just there on the issues
Okay,
tab. So the issues, like, yeah, there's a huge range of them, but I know that a lot are Veet specific. I went through a few of them.
nice.
And
So
there's
this
a
is
Svelte kit blockers in Veet. There's the other one.
okay. So these would be like,
That sounds good. There were 200 at one point. Uh, and actually, one day I checked, I think they were down to 3 and they were Windows issues. And I'm like, oh, we're getting close. And then all of a sudden, the next day, they were like back up.
oh
So,
gosh,
yeah.
yeah. I'm sure they have stuff coming in, coming
It's
in
just
constantly.
coming in constantly. So, yeah, I mean, it's close and it's workable right now.
Hmm.
I mean, a lot of the blockers are not things that a normal developer is going to run into.
Yeah.
So, some enterprise companies may run into those, but I mean, I haven't run into any issues in a while other than Windows stuff, which I haven't. I'm on WSL now, so should be fine.
Nice. Yeah. It's kind of cool though how much success it has had and how much visibility SvelteKit has gotten from from just being in beta. Like I feel like there's a lot of people, again, like no one tries it and doesn't love it. And it seems like plenty of people are trying it and using it. Scott, like I know Scott had talked about it so much. I didn't realize he was actually jumping ship and like
Yeah.
doing level tutorials in Svelte. Cause last I'd heard, he was like, yeah, if I were to do it again, I would choose Svelte, but I'm not going to go through that process. That was probably a couple of months ago. And now
That
he's
was a
like,
couple months ago on Syntax, and then he
mm-hmm,
went on Spelt Radio, and he had been talking about doing it because
yeah,
I think he said that he spent a weekend just kind of saying, what would this look like if we did? And
mm-hmm,
so he did the harder problems. He said it took him like 3 hours to do some of the harder problems for React in Svelte, and it cut like half the code. So then he's like, well, maybe we should look at this. And then he went
and
and
they
did a
ran with
Svelte
it.
Radio episode and said
Cool.
that they're working on it. And I mean, I'm hoping it should be done soon.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be exciting. And that's a good point. Like, if it's still in beta and he can do level up tutorials on it, that shows
Yeah.
the power of like, that's fine.
Yeah.
You can use it.
He sent me a preview link yesterday. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that out loud or not.
He shared one in the Discord
Oh,
too.
he
So,
did.
I mean,
Okay,
I
so I'm
think it
not I'm
is
not
like
special.
available publicly, but it's
Okay.
not like out for the public.
Yeah. Everything looked like it was working good. He said September,
Yes.
which is
Exciting.
upon us. Yeah,
Oh, did
that's
he
right.
say September? Yeah.
Yeah. Um well, do you have any last thoughts or comments for people on SvelteKit that you want to share before we wrap up?
I mean, just try it. Like, honestly, just try it. You'll love it like everyone else does. I mean, it is seriously like that little bit of magic, sugar, syntax, and it's like writing vanilla without the parts you hate about writing vanilla.
Love it.
So,
That's got to be the number one takeaway today. Is like
yeah.
is just try it.
Yeah.
I just realized Claudio commented in the chat from our programming YouTubers Discord. What's going on?
Right.
Thanks for the stream. Also, I want to give a minute really quickly for anybody that is hanging out, lurking, hasn't commented yet, especially if you're new to the channel. I would love for you to say hi and maybe give like the briefest introduction, whatever you want to share, what technologies you're interested in, where you are in the world, if you're comfortable with it. If you just want to say hi and wave, that's great too. But I'd love to kind of help interact because I think it's easy to get caught up with people that we already know and chat with. So if anybody's hanging out that we haven't interacted much, you're kind of lurking in the chat, I'll give you a minute to just say hi before we head out. And Alex Trost is
Front-end horse.
is streaming. So we'll raid everyone over to his channel when we wrap up here in a minute. This is the beauty of streaming, of like having to kill time after you ask a question versus the delay in stream and then giving people time to respond.
Super awkward pauses.
That's right.
It's fun.
Yeah, Alex did. I wonder, hopefully he's not going to make this a common thing because we're going to have to compete with each other, because I've been streaming at this time on Fridays for months. So I'm going to have a talk with Alex about this. Just kidding. His stuff is awesome. So I think we've given a little bit of time for anybody that's interested. Unfortunately, what is Trost Codes? There we go. Just making sure I get his username right. Trost Codes. I'm gonna kick off why did that not work? The raid over to Alex. This usually like takes longer on my machine than it should because of my machine being slow. So it'll take a few more seconds. But Brittney, thanks for hanging out and enlightening us all about Svelte and SvelteKit. Looking forward
thank you for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing all the continued awesome stuff that you have to share in the future.
Looking forward to it.
All right. I will send everybody over. Enjoy Trost Codes. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you next time.
Thank you. See ya.
All right. I think that finally went.